Now, what we were doing was we were doing pretty much we did all these equations. This kind of we were discussing what all the equations that you did in your O levels. ठीक है उसके अंदर we made a list of these equations. Then we talked about polyatomic ions. We did a little bit uh, of dot and cross diagrams. Just I showed you how a polyatomic ion is formed. ठीक है, so you must be familiar with some of the dot and cross diagrams. You should be familiar. चार्जेस पढ़े थे कि कौन से ग्रुप पे कौन सा चार्ज होता है, फिर पॉलीटॉमिक आयंस की लिस्ट. This is also all done in O levels. Then I gave you a brief idea of what acids and bases will be from now on. I said कि acids are proton donors and bases are proton acceptors. Uh, ये आपकी official definition है, ठीक है. You can't stray away from this definition. OH ions का कोई mention नहीं करना. This is your official definition. If you don't write this definition, बीच में कहीं से OH ions ले आए तो you're going to lose marks for this, ठीक है. And this is known as the Bronsted-Lowry definition. And I told you कि फिर मैंने explain भी किया था थोड़ा सा कि why is H plus 1 important. I told you कि water is important. Water has two ions. So pure water has both ions in equal quantity, both of them. That's called a neutral solution. But if you add an acid, तो water जो है उसका balance खराब हो जाता है, ठीक है. Acids produce H plus 1 ions, तो solution acidic हो जाता है. Base add करते हैं तो H plus 1 ions कम हो जाते हैं. The reason water is important is because water is everywhere. It's involved in pretty much all the reactions that are happening on the Earth's crust. अच्छा, anyways, यहाँ पे हमने छोड़ा था and we're going to quickly practice each equation that we did. ठीक है, one by one we're going to practice quickly. This is very important. A lot of people always are weak at equations. Remember, okay, you might get a very big question on moles. ठीक है, इसके अंदर सब कुछ एक equation पे depend कर रहा है. If you're not able to make that equation, you're going to lose marks. Now, ठीक है, सबका मैं एक एग्जांपल दो एग्जांपल्स हम कर लेते हैं. The first one, metal plus acid. What's going to be produced? बाकी मैं प्रैक्टिस के लिए और मैं I'll assign some video lectures on this. So ताकि we can speed this up. Metal plus acid. So if you have a metal, calcium plus any acid, nitric acid. अच्छा, इसमें देख लेते हैं कि one thing that we did not do is the list of acids. वो हम लिस्ट भी ना यहाँ पे पूरी लिख लेते हैं पहले कि how many different types of acids do you have. तो और वही है जो आपने which you studied in O levels. ठीक है, there is HCl, there's HNO3, which is nitric acid, then you have H3PO4, which is phosphoric acid, then you have H2SO4, which is sulfuric acid. Hopefully you all remember the names. Then you have H2CO3, which is carbonic acid. ठीक है, और इसमें कोई मिस तो नहीं हुआ, नाइट्रेट, फॉस्फेट, सल्फेट्स. अच्छा, then you have some variants of this. This is known as nitrous acid. मतलब ये नाइट्रिक है. This other one is known as nitrous. फिर एक phosphoric होता है. Then there's another one which is phosphorus. ठीक है, this is phosphoric. फिर sulfuric होता है तो there's another one which is sulfurous. उसमें एक ऑक्सीजन कम होता है. So it has a total of 3 oxygens. So this is your, so this is your not sulfuric, it's your sulfurous acid. Anyways, you have these acids which you should know by they should be on your fingertips. ठीक है, कोई आपको sulfurous mention करे और ना सिर्फ वो पता होना चाहिए, also should know कि what ions make up those acids. मतलब you must know कि if sulfuric acid dissociates, it has two ions. One is H plus 1, the other one is SO4 minus 2. उसी तरह बाकियों का भी पता होना चाहिए कि nitrous acid है तो NO2 minus 1 है और H plus 1 है. ठीक है, so you must know कि what combination of ions make up these acids. अच्छा, okay, moving to these equations. So I have a metal plus acid equation. Salt किस तरह बनती है? Salt is a neutral compound that is produced when an acid is neutralized. Acid neutralized का मतलब है कि acid में acid था क्यों? The reason an acid is because it has H plus 1 ions. It can produce H plus 1 ions. So if you get rid of these H plus 1 ions, then it's no longer an acid. So the metal would come in and it would knock out the H, and when it knocks and uski jagah pe aa jata hai. The calcium and NO3. But then you have to get the formula right. Calcium is 2 plus, NO3 is minus 1, which makes, if you do crisscross, the formula would be calcium nitrate. This would become twice. Plus, there's going to be hydrogen gas that is going to be produced in this reaction. और बाकी आपने बैलेंस करना है, you can balance this equation. KNO3 2 है, तो यहाँ पे आप इसको 2 से मल्टीप्लाई कर रहे हैं, and that pretty much balances this equation. इसमें ख्याल ये रखना है कि only reactive metals react. Above hydrogen in the reactivity series. So reactivity series थी, उसमें the reactive metals are the ones that are going to react. Not gold and etc. बाकी चीजें नहीं. As a second reaction, let's quickly move to the second reaction. The second reaction that we studied was a metal oxide or a metal hydroxide reaction. अच्छा, एक चीज में फिर से I'm going to stress this again. The number one challenge in an A levels paper is time. ठीक है, you're always short of time. तो मतलब ये इक्वेशन है ना, फॉर एग्जांपल, ये आपको इतनी प्रैक्टिस होनी चाहिए कि मेंटली आपको पता होनी चाहिए कि मतलब इसकी बैलेंसिंग भी ना आपको मेंटली पता हो. But you don't have time to actually write down the whole equation and then मतलब you can do that, लेकिन it's going to consume a lot of time. So people have to be very good with equations. जितनी ज़्यादा प्रैक्टिस करोगे उतना आप स्पीड में लिख सकोगे. ठीक है. अच्छा, this one, metal oxide plus acid, and it produces salt water. That's it. So one example is, let's take magnesium hydroxide. Magnesium, Mg is 2 plus, OH is minus 1, so it's going to be MgOH twice. Plus, let's say phosphoric acid, which is H3PO4. Salt उसी तरह बनेगी. Salt किस तरह बनेगी? The Mg would come in, metal would, positive ion would come in, it would knock out the H. और उसकी जगह खुद आ जाएगा. So it's going to be Mg and PO4. Mg is 2 plus, PO4 is minus 3. If you do crisscross, it's going to be Mg3PO4 twice plus H2O. ठीक है, that's the equation. अच्छा, when equations क्या है कि there's अच्छा, in equations का ये कि you need to balance these equations. Now, as soon as your equations become bigger and bigger, they become harder to balance. ठीक है, so how do you? So you must know certain techniques for balancing. To remember this very carefully, when you're trying to balance this equation, this would make things quicker. Although you already know how to balance this, maybe you know this as well. लेकिन एक बस रूल याद रख लो. Balance always the easiest first. मतलब उस एलिमेंट को बैलेंस करना है. Because as soon as you have more and more terms, balancing becomes difficult. So balance the easiest first. Easiest is the one that element that comes in the least number of places, least number of times. It's the least number of places and least number of times. So if you look at this equation, it's going to be सबसे कम जो आ रहा है, that's magnesium. Magnesium is in two places. It's over here and over here. Oxygen is in 1, 2, 3 and 4 places. So oxygen को ना छेड़ो. Easiest को छेड़ो. The least number of places. Magnesium is 3. तो यहाँ पे भी magnesium 3 कर लो. उसके बाद least number of places में कौन सा आ रहा है? P आ रहा है. P bracket twice है, तो P is twice. There's only one P over here, so I'm going to multiply that by 2. अच्छा, फिर least number of places. Hydrogen is in 3 places, 1, 2 and 3. Oxygen is in 4 places. तो किसको पहले balance करना है? Hydrogen को पहले balance करो. तो there are 6 hydrogens over here and there are 6 hydrogens over here, so that's a total of 12 hydrogens. तो यहाँ पे I'm going to multiply this by 6. अच्छा जो मैक्सिमम नंबर ऑफ प्लेसेस में जो एलिमेंट आ रहा है ना ऑक्सीजन 1 2 3 एंड 4 वो खुद ही बैलेंस हो जाएगा. यू डोंट इवन हैव टू ट्राई. और ऑक्सीजन को काउंट करो, देयर 6 ऑक्सीजंस एंड देयर 8 ऑक्सीजंस ओवर हियर. तो उसका मतलब है दैट्स अ टोटल ऑफ 14 ऑक्सीजंस. PO4 ट्वाइस है, सो दैट्स 8 ऑक्सीजंस प्लस 6 ऑक्सीजंस, सो दैट इज आल्सो 14 ऑक्सीजंस. अच्छा खैर ये इक्वेशन जो है मेटल ऑक्साइड प्लस acid. Every time it's going to be salt, water that's going to be produced. How is the salt produced? Get rid of the H, उसका metal उसकी जगह पे place कर दो. ठीक है. Is this clear? Rida, Hiba, is this clear? अच्छा, just make sure. I'll give you a lot of practice questions on this. Just make sure कि the challenge है ना, that's not the equation. It's doing the equation very very quickly. You don't have time. ठीक है. मतलब अगर मैं आपको कहूँगा कि एल्यूमिनियम ऑक्साइड प्लस HCl रिएक्शन लिखो, तो मतलब इट शुड बी इंस्टेंट, इट शुड बी वेरी इंस्टेंट. 5 seconds के अंदर आपको पता होना चाहिए कि एल्यूमिनियम ऑक्साइड प्लस HCl, what is the reaction, what is the salt that's going to be produced, how would the equation be balanced. So you have to be very quick with this. ठीक है. सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज टाइम का है. अच्छा नंबर 4. 4 क्या था? कार्बोनेट प्लस एसिड. So that would end up producing it would end up producing uh, salt, water, and carbon dioxide. So let's do number 4. Isme what's going to happen is let's pick sodium carbonate. Sodium is +1, group 1. Carbonate is -2, so Na2CO3 plus nitric acid कर लेते हैं HNO3. How would the salt be produced? The same way. Sodium would come in and knock out the H. So Na and NO3. Na is +1, NO3 is -1, so this formula is fine. And then you're going to have water and carbon dioxide. Water and carbon dioxide. Anyways, there are 2 sodiums, so there should be 2 sodiums on this side. आसान वालों को balance करो. अच्छा फिर आसान कौन सा है? NO3 N को कर लेते हैं. There is 1 N, लेकिन 2 molecules हैं, so that's 2N. तो इसको भी 2 से multiply कर देते हैं. और the rest of the equation looks kind of balanced. ठीक है. There's 1 carbon, there's 1 carbon. There's 2 sodiums, hydrogens 2 है, hydrogens 2 है. तो oxygen so सबसे मुश्किल होगा ना, that would balance itself. So there's O3, 6 oxygens, 9 oxygens over here, and there are 6 oxygens, 1, 7 plus 2, 9. तो सबसे मुश्किल जो है वो खुद ही balance हो जाएगा. अच्छा, now over here, I'm going to do one more thing. We're done with 4 equations. What we're going to do is we're going to study ionic equations, because a lot of times you'll be asked to write ionic equations. Now, Ionic equation is just another version of the equation that we did above. Okay? Nothing different. But it's the same equation. Metal oxide, metal hydroxide, अगर react करते हैं. It's actually मैं 3 किया. I don't know why I wrote 4. This is the third one. अच्छा, Ionic equation. Now, to write the Ionic equation, you must know the solubility of these compounds as well. That's very important as well. So we're going to talk slightly, थोड़ा सा हम अब detrack होके solubility of compounds. Compounds कर लेते हैं, not all of them are ionic, बल्कि solubility of acids, bases, and salts. अच्छा, one thing when we were talking about ionic compounds was कि हमने start में पढ़ा था कि if charges are less on ions, then they are going to be more soluble. As if charges are less, for example, NaCl is very soluble. तो हमने पहले पढ़ा था कि NaCl, Na positive and Cl -1. This is the ionic lattice. Let's think of this as a tiny crystal of NaCl. So positive ions attracting negative ions. This is what a typical ionic lattice looks like. You have positive ions attracting negative ions. तो जब आप इसको उसमें हिलाते हो वाटर के अंदर, you mix this crystal in water, you add it in water. तो चम्मच से आप इसको vigorously stir करते हो. And when you do this, then the ions dissociate. मतलब Na+1 जब आप इसको vigorously spoon से ना move करोगे ना, that is what you do. कि salt नमक को आप पानी में डालते हो, and that's the first thing that you do. You mix it in water. So all your ions, they're going to just sort of randomly roam around, and they're going to dissociate. आप उसके ना सारे ionic bonds तोड़ दोगे. And they're good. When they go into water, they get surrounded by water molecules. Lots and lots of water molecules. And it's a dilute solution, so there are lots, a billion times more water molecules. And they don't allow the crystal to reform. The sodium ions cannot get back to Cl-1. Why? Because there are lots of water molecules in between. So this is solubility. Solubility can take a crystal, चम्मच से उसे हिलाओ, the ions would dissociate and make sure that the ions don't get back together again. अगर तो आप बीच में से पानी evaporate कर दोगे ना, crystallization में जिस तरह करते हो, तो अब ions जो है ना, they can kind of get back together again. तो आपने क्या करना है, आप make sure you add enough water that the ions can simply not meet each other and they don't attract each other. ठीक है? So if charges are less on ions, it's going to be more soluble. Why? Because they dissociate easily. उस क्रिस्टल को तोड़ना बहुत आसान है. Is this clear? Yes or no? Hiba, is this clear? Then there's certain ionic compounds which are not soluble. There's certain ionic compounds which are not soluble. For example, calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is your marble. Calcium carbonate, why is it not soluble? Because uska jo ionic lattice hai, that is very strong. And because it's strong, the ions, well, spoons in it's very hard to actually. But a marble ka piece, imagine though you add it in water. So the ions are attracting each other so strongly that they're not going to dissociate in the first place. ठीक है, मतलब उसको मार्बल के पीस को तोड़ना, that's very difficult. Salt का पीस क्रश करना easy है. Why is the attraction larger? Because the attraction is larger because charges ज़्यादा है. And there are two things. जो strength of lattice, is determined by the charge and by the size of ion. Smaller ions का ना size वो lattice strong होता है because they are closer together. Smaller ions close together होते हैं, they're tightly packed, so they are very strongly attracted to each other. Anyways, so calcium carbonate is not going to dissolve. तो एक simple सा rule है कि solubility है कि charges अगर ज़्यादा होंगे ना, तो it's not going to be soluble. They're going to attract each other very strongly. Magnesium oxide का lattice है, it's insoluble. Aluminium oxide, extremely insoluble. क्योंकि Al+3 है, O-2 है, the ions would not dissociate. And even if the ions dissociate, let's imagine कि calcium+2 और carbonate -2, they somehow आपने इतनी vigorously spoon move किया ना कि उनमें से एक दो ion ना टूट के अलग हो गए. Now what's going to happen is that the two ions are still, even if they dissociate in water, they're going to attract each other very strongly क्योंकि charges ज़्यादा है. +2 is going to attract -2 very strongly. तो वो ये बीच में से ना सारे वाटर मॉलिक्यूल्स को साइड पे पुश करेंगे एंड दे गोइंग टू गेट बैक टुगेदर अगेन टू फॉर्म द प्रेसिपिटेट बैक अगेन. मतलब आप जितना मर्जी स्टर कर लो ना, जितना मर्जी जोर से स्टर कर लो, एंड लेट्स इमेजिन कि वो लैटिस डिसोसिएट हो भी जाता है, it's not going to remain dissociated. The ions would attract each other and they would form the crystal back again. So this is not soluble. अच्छा, anyways, we're going to quickly go through the solubility table. Rule हमें पता लग गया कि क्या है, कि it is, अच्छा, the rule is, अच्छा, the rule is कि charges are less, then it's going to be more soluble. तो ये अब solubility के rules ही हैं कि number one, group 1 वाले compounds NO3 minus 1, NH4 plus 1, and you have another one which is acids H plus 1. ठीक है, any compound that has these plus 1 minus 1 ions, they're all soluble. ठीक है, ऊपर भी हमने ये डिस्कस किया. Second is, as soon as you move to sulfates, SO4 minus 2, then there would be exceptions, all soluble except all soluble except you have PbSO4, SrSO4, uh, BaSO4, and silver sulfate Ag2SO4, and partially calcium sulfate. As the next one, you have ये हो गया. उसके बाद you have के carbonates and phosphates are mostly insoluble. As they are mostly insoluble, except the carbonates and phosphates are mostly insoluble, except वो group 1 वाले soluble थे. Group 1 NH4 plus 1. Then you have Cl minus 1, Br minus 1, and I minus 1. So they are mostly soluble except Pb2 plus and Ag plus 1. इनके chlorides वगैरह they're not soluble. And lastly you have, इसको थोड़ा extend कर ले. अच्छा, just make sure ये सारी चीजें जो है ना, ये these are all basics. ठीक है, they come very frequently. Entire questions depend on this. अच्छा, then you have lastly you have OH minus 1. अच्छा, oxides and hydroxides, they are mostly insoluble except group 1 NH4 plus 1 and some in group 2. तो इनकी हम पूरी लिस्ट बना लेते हैं. ग्रुप 2 में कौन से हैं? ग्रुप 2 में यू हैव मैग्नीशियम हाइड्रोक्साइड विच इज इनसॉल्युबल. नीचे जाते रहते हो तो सॉल्युबिलिटी इंक्रीज होती है. कैल्शियम हाइड्रोक्साइड SrOH2 is even more soluble, and then you have barium hydroxide which is even more soluble. So this is solubility increasing. The first one is insoluble. और इनका एग्जैक्ट याद रखना है. Inorganic के अंदर you get a lot of questions on this. The first one is insoluble. Calcium hydroxide is partially soluble. और जो आखिरी दो है ना, these are soluble. Anyways, you're already familiar with the solubility table. Okay, which compounds are soluble and which compounds are not soluble. इसकी हम application एक दो कर लेते हैं कि which is we're going to learn how to write ionic equations. Okay, if you're given any equation, ठीक है, any equation, let's assume ऊपर वाली जो हमने equation मिली हुई है, we'll do that. Calcium carbonate. Let's pick a carbonate plus acid equation. I have hydrochloric acid. The salt would be produced. H की जगह there's going to be calcium. Calcium is 2 plus, Cl is minus 1, so it's going to be CaCl2 plus, it's going to be H2O and carbon dioxide. So how do you write the ionic equation? The first thing is step one. Step one is write down the states. So what that means is if you write states, carbonates क्या होते हैं, soluble या insoluble? Open the solubility table, उसमें carbonates का लिखा हुआ है कि they are all mostly insoluble. Except group 1, this is not group 1, so they're mostly insoluble. So calcium carbonate is a solid, it's insoluble. जो insoluble होगा, that would be written as a solid. Balance भी कर लेते हैं. Hydrochloric acid, acids का पहले लिखा हुआ था, they're all aqueous. Chlorides के बारे में क्या लिखा हुआ है? Chlorides के बारे में it's written कि go back, Cl-1, Br-1, mostly soluble. Not an exception, it's all soluble. So calcium chloride is soluble, so it's aqueous as well. And then you have water, and you have, which is a liquid, and carbon dioxide, which is a gas. Achha, so let's move to step 2 now. Step 1 ho gaya. We have successfully written down the states by looking at the solubility table. ठीक है, is this clear? Hiba, is this clear? Achha, so step 2 is कि you dissociate. Dissociate those substances that are in aqueous state. So you dissociate those compounds which are, dissociate का क्या मतलब है? Dissociate का मतलब था कि अगर NaCl को पानी में dissolve करो, the ions separate. They mix in water and they go in different directions. So it's sodium ions aqueous and Cl-1 aqueous. If it doesn't dissociate, if it's insoluble, it doesn't dissociate. So you can only dissociate those ions, those compounds which are already in aqueous state. So if you go back and have a look, to कौन aqueous है? The first one, it's definitely not aqueous. ये जो आपका calcium carbonate है, ठीक है? That's not aqueous. So what we are going to do is कि उसको उसी तरह लिखो. It would be written as calcium carbonate and solid. Achha, it would be written exactly the same way. Next one, HCl is aqueous. HCl में कौन से, तो इसको dissociate करो. उसके ions जो होंगे ना, they're not going to be together. मतलब अगर वो पानी के अंदर mix हो गया ना, the H+1 and the Cl-1 are all swimming around, roaming in different directions. So it's going to be 2H+1 plus 2Cl-1. अलग अलग हो जाएंगे, ठीक है, aqueous state में. Then the next one, calcium chloride is also aqueous. तो aqueous का मतलब है उसके ions को dissociate करो. पहले तो ये figure out करो इसमें ions हैं कौन से. There's calcium 2 plus and Cl-1. ये जो 2 आ रहा है ना, ये criss cross करने की वजह से to balance the charges. तो पहले तो वो देखो ions कौन से हैं. The ions would separate. So calcium 2 plus and Cl-1, they go their different ways. And then 2 Cl ions. तो आप बड़ा 2 लिखोगे क्योंकि because smaller 2 indicates, smaller 2 you write them when they're together. But now they're no longer together. They're all separate. So it's going to be 2 Cl-1, capital 2 होगा. Coefficient में. And these would be aqueous as well, plus there's going to be water and carbon dioxide. इनको dissociate नहीं करना, ये liquid है और ये gas है. Only acid, bases and salts. So in this case, in our case, we dissociated 2 compounds. One was HCl, the other one was calcium chloride. अच्छा, अब dissociate करने के बाद what you have to do is that that's where the third step comes in. Step number 3 is remove spectator ions, the ones that are not doing anything. ठीक है, the ones that are not doing anything. So in this case, the ones that are not doing anything, that remain completely unchanged. So look at Cl minus 1 over here. And there's Cl minus 1 on the other side as well. It did not do anything. पहले भी वो वैसे ही था, बाद में भी वैसे ही है. बाकी जितने भी ions हैं, they took part in the reaction. So your final ionic equation is just get rid of the spectator ions. So your final ionic equation is that there is calcium carbonate solid plus इधर क्या बचा है 2H plus 1 aqueous, and the product is going to have Ca2 plus aqueous plus there is H2O, which is liquid, and you have CO2, which is a gas. So that's your ionic equation. So remember the 3 steps in writing an ionic equation. First, write an equation. Then write the states depending on the solubility. Remember, H2 is always a liquid, CO2 is always a gas. जो insoluble है उसको solid लिखते हैं, जो dissolve हो जाता है, that's going to be written as aqueous. फिर step 2 के अंदर dissociate aqueous acids, bases, and salts. So any reactant or product that is aqueous, break it down, separate them into their ions. Well, HCl is H plus 1 and Cl minus 1. Calcium chloride is calcium 2 plus and Cl minus 1. Once you've written this and you've dissociated these two compounds, remove the ions that are not doing anything, which in this case is Cl minus 1. और जब आप उसको remove करोगे, the remaining equation is your ionic equation. ठीक है? Is this clear? Heba, Rida, is this clear? अच्छा, then तो हम ना अभी सॉलिबिलिटी वगैरह ना अगली इक्वेशंस कर रहे हैं, ठीक है? उनके अंदर we going to practice these again. ठीक है? So we've learned how to make ionic equations. उससे अगला जो part है ना, that is there was a reaction that we did. मैं पीछे जाके equation पहले pick कर लूँ. We're done with 3 equations right now. As a third, ये 4th, 5th, 6th पे आ जाता है ionic precipitation. So equation number 6 is known as ionic precipitation. Now, what type of reaction is this? Now, this is a reaction in which the rule is you mix any two soluble acids, bases, and salts. So you mix any two soluble acids, bases, and salts. और जब आप उनको mix करते हो, sometimes the reaction would happen, sometimes the reaction is not going to happen. So for example, I mix NaCl with silver nitrate. So any two things can be mixed together. NaCl is soluble, group 1. Silver nitrate, NO3 वाली चीजें सारी soluble होती हैं. That's also soluble. So if it's aqueous, तो इसका मतलब है कि in a beaker, if you pour both of them into a beaker, तो दोनों dissociate हो जाएंगे. So your solution would contain lots of sodium ions, lots of Cl ions, अलग-अलग. And your solution would also contain lots of silver ions and lots of nitrate ions, all roaming around and kept apart by the water that's in between them. अच्छा, लेकिन there are two ions which are, the ions are going to randomly combine with each other. Now what could happen is कि Ag plus 1 ion and the Cl ion from the NaCl they might get together to form AgCl. And AgCl, if it's formed, तो हमने solubility table में लिखा था कि it's not soluble. Chlorides के अंदर ना silver chloride is insoluble. So what's going to happen is कि if these two combine, at the bottom they would form this solid of AgCl. बाकी दोनों का इतना मसला नहीं है. Na+1 और NO3 अगर मिल भी जाए ना, the lattice is going to be very weak and they're going to be very soluble. तो वो वापस dissociate होकर पानी के अंदर mix हो जाएंगे. They're not going to form a precipitate. लेकिन AgCl, if they combine, then they probably attract each other so strongly that they form this crystal back again. So your reaction is, okay, if you mix any two soluble compounds, uh, AgCl precipitate is going to be formed. So AgCl precipitate is going to be formed, and पीछे क्या रह जाएगा solution में sodium nitrate, which is going to be in aqueous state. ठीक है, that is what's going to be formed over here. So this is how the reaction goes. अच्छा, ये वाला reaction clear है? Hiba and Rida, is this clear? चलिए ठीक है. अच्छा, remember this last one, this reaction happens only if there's something insoluble that's being formed. You could mix any two things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the reaction would happen. Well, for example, if I mix NaCl with कोई भी कर लेते हैं, potassium carbonate, nothing would happen in this case क्योंकि कोई चीज insoluble बनेगी नहीं. Both of them are soluble, तो both of them would dissociate. Na+1 अलग घूम रहा होगा, and you would have Cl-1 roaming around, and you would have K+1, and you would have carbonate -2 in the solution. But any combination none of the combinations results in anything that is remotely insoluble. Sodium carbonate is soluble, potassium chloride is soluble, so the ions would just remain mixed. No precipitate would be formed. ठीक है, so basically you don't have any reaction. चलो बस ये होमवर्क लिख लो. These are the questions that you have to send WhatsApp के ऊपर. The question is, make a bunch of equations. For example, you have I'm giving you substances: magnesium oxide, aluminium oxide. You have barium hydroxide and aluminium metal. इसको react करना है with. Now all of these should be separate equations. You have to react them with these acids. The acids are HCl, HNO3, and there is H2SO4. And not only that, but you could social these are 4 into 3. These are 12 equations. मतलब magnesium oxide की सारों के साथ लिखनी है. अच्छा, not only that, but you also have to, या एक मैं निकाल देता हूँ बीच में से, 8 कर लेते हैं. ठीक है. Remember, speed is very important. AS में मतलब the reason we are practicing equations is you have to learn how to make them very very quickly. अच्छा, बाकी पार्ट कर लेते हैं कि ये write states, and in each case write the ionic equation as well. ठीक है, इज दिस क्लियर? ये कोशिश करना है आज ही करके भेज दो, वरना कल तक दे दो. ठीक है, कोशिश करो आज दे दो if you have time. चलिए, any questions about this? Hiba, is everything clear? Yes or no? चलिए ठीक है, we'll continue with this equations वाला काम जल्दी से खत्म करेंगे. मोल्स के ऊपर भी बस इतना टाइम नहीं ज़ाया करेंगे. पास पेपर्स हम ज़्यादा फोकस करेंगे, जो ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक्स है उनकी तरफ हम मूव करेंगे. ठीक है, जस्ट मेक श्योर यू डू दीज. चलिए, ओके देन, टेक केयर, अल्लाह हाफिज़.